As it turns out, there are reasons schools stay inside the box when they make hires. Bryan Harsin was hailed as an outside-the-box hire when Auburn plucked him away from Boise State. He arrived with a sterling win-loss record, 69-19, and a Fiesta Bowl win, but there were questions from day one on how a man with no Real experience recruiting the South would succeed in the ultra-competitive Southeastern Conference. The spin at the time, from those involved in the search, is Harsin would do a better job at developing quarterbacks once they got to Auburn, an area Gus Malzahn had struggled with in the post-Cam Newton era. They liked that he was an outsider after spending decades hiring exclusively coaches with ties back to Auburn, the SEC, or the state of Alabama. Even though he's only 16 games into his tenure at Auburn, it is already time to declare the decision a mistake. Harsin's track record suggests he's a good coach, but he hasn't shown it at Auburn. The latest embarrassment, a 41-12 loss at home to Penn State, illustrates how doomed Harsin already is as Auburn's head coach. Harsin hasn't developed quarterbacks any better than Malzahn, he can't recruit well enough to compete with the SEC's upper echelon, and he's not an elite XS and OS coach to overcome those deficiencies. That's a recipe to get you fired long before your initial 6-year contract runs out, as Harsin is well on his way to experiencing. Saturday was a critically important opportunity for Harsin. Not only did he need to beat Penn State ahead of a brutal SEC schedule, but Harsin badly needed to impress the talented collection of recruits assembled inside Jordan-Hare Stadium. Auburn entered Saturday with the nation's 62nd ranked recruiting class, according to 247 Sports, good for the lowest ranked class in the SEC. 6 SEC schools currently have classes ranked in the top 15, with Auburn's chief rivals Alabama. No. That's the standard Harsin's held against, and he's failing miserably. It's unlikely Saturday's pitiful performance will have the nation's top recruits fighting themselves to commit to Auburn. Harsin entered this season on the hottest seat in the SEC. Former Auburn athletic director Allen Greene bucked the wishes of some influential boosters when he hired Harsin in 2020, throwing him into a precarious situation. When you don't have the support of the right people, especially at a school like Auburn, you are doomed from the get-go, as we can now see Harsin was the minute he left Idaho for Alabama. After a disappointing 6-7 first season, there was a well-publicized effort to get Harsin fired, including an inquiry into how he runs his program. That effort ultimately failed, and he returned for year 2, though the scars remained. The people who wanted him fired after that first season didn't abandon those feelings just because the first try failed either, putting considerable pressure on Harsin this season to deliver big results. Before the season started, the perception throughout college football is Harsin would have a hard time getting a year 3, a feeling that only intensified when Greene left the school after not having his contract renewed. Harsin, to his credit, went on a much-needed PR tour this offseason as he tried to soften his image and build relationships outside of the football building. He finally seemed to realize he badly needed friends if he was going to survive at Auburn. He also needed to win so many games it was impossible to get rid of him. Don't bank on Harsin returning for a year 3 at this rate. Not when Auburn still has to play LSU, at Georgia, at Ole Miss, Arkansas, Texas A&M, and at Alabama, among others. It's a relentless schedule that Auburn has little shot of succeeding with, given the talent and coaching deficiencies. Harsin's best shot at long-term survival was finding an answer at the quarterback position, he hasn't, and creating momentum on the recruiting trail, he hasn't. There is little reason now to believe Harsin is capable of fixing the issues that led to such a sloppy, listless performance against Penn State on Saturday. Soon attention will turn to who Auburn should hire to replace Harsin when the axe falls. Look for Auburn to stay inside the box in which it has long been comfortable, focusing on a coach that won't be a fish out of water like Harsin. Despite all the drama surrounding Auburn, it is still one of the better jobs in the SEC and will attract quality candidates. Auburn shouldn't have to look too far for one of the best candidates, though, given he resides one state over in Mississippi. Lane Kiffin was very interested in the job in 2020 when Auburn hired Harsin, according to those familiar with the search process, and should be one of the first names Auburn calls when it has its next opening. Kiffin's issues are well known, but he's the shot of excitement Auburn needs right now. He'll win games, his offense will be fun to watch, and clearly he'll have no problem poking the bear over in Tuscaloosa. Kiffin has publicly talked about his love of Oxford, but those who know him well say there will always be a restlessness to the man who once bailed after a single season at Tennessee. At a minimum, it'll be worth a call to Kiffin's agent, Jimmy Sexton, to gauge the Ole Miss head coach's interest level this time around. It might feel absurd to already be discussing possible coach replacements only 3 weeks into the season, but that's how bad things have already gotten at Auburn. The school's leadership tried something different, and Saturday was more conclusive evidence that it didn't work. Goodman, Auburn's Bryan Harsin, said, "Just watch, but what's to see?" Related, Bryan Harsin addresses job security after Penn State blowout loss. Georgia is an absolute behemoth. The Bulldogs crushed South Carolina in every way in a 48-7 victory that could have been even worse. I love the job offensive coordinator Todd Monken is doing, and this Georgia offense looks explosive. Georgia is the clear top team to beat in the SEC right now, with Alabama checking in at no. Credit is due to Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M for steadying the ship and beating a ranked Miami team 1 week after a disastrous loss to Appalachian State. Max Johnson didn't light things up at quarterback, but he certainly looked like the better option. The final score, 63-7, looks great, but there is still something off about this Alabama offense. Unless something changes soon, there are going to be more shaky offensive performances in the future. That October SEC stretch looms particularly large. Strong first SEC win for Brian Kelly and his LSU Tigers. Mississippi State was firmly in control of that game early, but LSU hung around and capitalized on the Bulldogs' mistakes. He has his flaws, but LSU QB Jaden Daniels is awfully likable and can make some big-time plays when he needs to. As my colleague Craig Stevenson pointed out on Twitter, this is why all the piling on of Brian Kelly after the Florida State loss was silly. The man is going to win games in Baton Rouge. We need to remember why preseason expectations for this Florida team were limited. The Gators shot up the rankings after an upset win over Utah, but this is still not a particularly talented team. Billy Napier has done a good job already, but Florida is a couple plays away from being 0-3. Most pumped fan base, App State the first two-time winner for this column, but how could it be anyone other than App State after the week its fans just had? In a span of 7 days, App State knocked off then top 10 Texas A&M, hosted a raucous college game day in Boone, and then knocked off Troy on a last-second improbable Hail Mary touchdown. It'll never get better than this. Most panicked fan base, Michigan State. The Spartans laid a total dud against Washington on the road Saturday, resulting in a 39-28 loss to the Huskies that was worse than the final score suggests. Expectations change when you get a massive 10-year, $95 million contract like Mel Tucker did after one good season, and losing games to unranked Washington before starting Big Ten play isn't a great way to meet them. With an October 8th game against Ohio State looming, Michigan State can't afford any slip-ups against Minnesota and Maryland the next 2 weeks. 1. Florida at Tennessee, 2:30 p.m. CT. Another important game in determining the SEC East's second-best team. Kentucky owns the claim currently. 2. Arkansas at Texas A&M, 6 p.m. CT. The Razorbacks struggled in the return of Bobby Petrino while the Aggies steadied themselves after a rough week. This should be a rock fight and a lot of fun to watch. 3. Missouri at Auburn, 11 a.m. CT. Two head coaches who could badly use a big win right now. If Auburn loses this game, Bryan Harsin might want to hire a real estate agent. 4. Tulsa at Ole Miss, 3 p.m. CT. The SEC slate has a big drop-off after Missouri-Auburn, but Ole Miss should at least put up a lot of points in this one. 5. Vanderbilt at Alabama, 6:30 p.m. CT. Your alternative viewing option when Arkansas Texas A&M goes to commercial and halftime breaks. John Talty is the sports editor and SEC insider for Alabama Media Group. He is the best-selling author of The Leadership Secrets of Nick Saban, How Alabama's Coach Became the Greatest Ever. Copyright 2022 Advanced Local Media LLC. Distributed by Tribune Content Agency, LLC.